Dear friends, I'm very excited today to share with you an interview with Jordan Rudess. Jordan is mostly known as a composer and keyboardist of Dream Theater, who has been named by Music Radar the greatest keyboard player of all time. But Jordan is also a music technologist who worked with MIT and Stanford University, who founded his company Wizdom Music, famous from GeoShred, an app that he uses on the stage. He also worked with Kurzweil, Rolly, Korg, and supports so many startups. Hard to actually name them all. So I hope you like this interview. But before we actually jump into it, I would like to ask you to follow and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify, whatever is the platform of your choice. This will help us to keep inviting guests like Jordan. Thank you so much, and let's dive in. Welcome to Audio Products Podcast. We are meeting with pro audio industry veterans, founders, product managers, UX designers, to learn how they build and manage the products we all love. You will get tips how to navigate your career in audio and how to develop a successful audio product, from musical instruments through audio plugins and gaming middleware up to music distribution platforms or consumer electronics like headphones, mics, and even automotive speaker systems. Enjoy. Here we go. Hey, Jordan. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's really like a big pleasure. I've been, like I mentioned before we started, I'm just like following all your interviews and, everything you do. So it's just like I would probably say even intimidating, to have you in the podcast. So cool.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Jordan, so I mentioned, I'm just very curious about your perspective, because usually I do interviews with audio nerds who build plugins and stuff, but you are actually immersed in both worlds, right? So just doing obviously some tech, but a lot of tech, but also being such a renowned and active musician. So your perspective probably would be a super unique. But I wanted to ask you, but also a little bit about education, because I always look at the technology as something, how to say. So I'm just playing really as an amateur, so just for myself and a little bit with my friends. But I met a lot of musicians who are, how to say, burned out, people usually after conservatories, being, exposed to the classical training, and, they say, I don't want to play music anymore, and even, attended some courses when they can sort of unlearn the a little bit of this, a conservative approach to education. So I'm just wondering, what's your, first of all, how did you get away and sort of didn't sort of get tired and get so creative and open to different genres, but also how would you advise to musicians who are how technology could help in sort of opening your mind into not being just a practice scales and being just
that's a good question. And for me, I was lucky enough to actually start my musical training when I was very, very young. And I had a teacher who was really coming from a jazz background. So that was my very first experience learning piano. And instead of this, the standard music notation books, he wanted to show me chords. And that was really cool. Kind of threw away the notation. He showed me chords, and I started to just play more by ear and looking at the a guitar chart with tabs and playing the piano. But about a year into that, my parents kind of got the feeling that I was talented and found a very serious teacher for me. So that stopped all the fun, and then I went to a teacher whose whole idea was to get me into the Juilliard school as a young person to study very seriously. So I auditioned. I got into Juilliard, And then, I was going to be a concert pianist, but I would always like to improvise. And so I would sneak away from the classroom and go into a practice room far away from my teacher's room so I could play boogie woogie and rock and blues and all the things that I kind of wanted to let go and experience in addition to the classical stuff. But when I was about 17 or so, friends started to really turn me on to the whole progressive rock kind of thing that was going on, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Yes, and Genesis. I had also heard some electronic music, Tangerine Dream, even Morton Subotnick stuff, and so my head was, kind of expanding a little bit already. But I was trying to figure out and to maintain the classical stuff. And I ended up auditioning for the Juilliard college level. And I got into the Juilliard College after going to the preparatory school for many years. But it didn't take too long for me to realize that I really needed to get away from that. Already I had, a little bit about synthesizers and the other possibilities of music. And I always liked to improvise, much to my Juilliard teacher's kind of dismay. They weren't thrilled about all that stuff. So I left just because I had this calling from this other creative part of my mind that wanted to go deeper and discover what that was all about. Because I love the rock energy of Keith Emerson playing progressive rock on these crazy keyboard sounds, and just all the amazing head spaces that you can get into by working with rock energy and synthesizers and electronics. And so I did leave and had to spend some years navigating and find my path, which sometimes I feel like I'm still doing, but it all involves the spirit of exploration and creativity, and kind of immersing myself in what directions I think would be good to kind of have the music tech go to in the future. So as far as being bored, I could understand kind of getting a little burnt out on just the straight kind of more narrow path, although I respect anybody who can spend time practicing a violin and classical music or piano or whatever, that they have that diligence and focus to do that is amazing. But for me as a person, I was really interested and felt that calling to kind of go in other directions.
But I remember when you visited the Rick Beato, I remember you mentioned Minimoog, right? And how badly you wanted it. So that's why I was wondering, was that any specific, synthesizer or any specific experience that also except for, of course, willing to, try stuff that, made you so,
Yeah. So some friends of mine, when I was 17, they arrived at my house. I think it was with a Moog Sonic 6 synthesizer. They just showed up unexpected. They just came to my house and brought the synthesizer because they thought that I would really like it. And they were absolutely right. They came in. My mother was not happy because she wanted me to stay with the classical music. But my friends just kind of came in the door with this thing and came to my bedroom. And I think I turned the filter knob and maybe moved some pitch control. And I went, oh, my God, this is unbelievable. All of a sudden I felt like the sounds were just going to a different part of my brain. And so then I became obsessed. I was listening to Rick Wakeman and Patrick Moraz and Keith Emerson, and I had to have a Minimoog. I just had to have one. So I bugged my parents, repeatedly until one day I got one.
Gotcha. Jordan, so if you can just roll forward a little bit, I'm just super curious. Again, you mentioned this already in the interviews, but founding Wizdom Music, and actually I think it was when you were already visiting musician in Stanford. But I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just curious how is to set up, like some music tech company, as a musician. So, how you learn to work with, I don't know, software engineers, maybe testers, designers, right? Because it also it was probably at the time, pretty new experience to you, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so I was really interested in synthesizers it really triggered some part of my creative imagination. And at first, when I learned the mini Moog, the mini Moog you could play completely organically. You didn't need to know anything technical about it, even though there's so many words written under the knobs, like, LFOs and modulation and oscillators and attack decay. Like, I didn't know what any of that meant. I was just turning knobs. I knew what every possible knob would do in every combination. I knew sonically what would happen if I moved anything. It wasn't until later when digital synthesizers came out and there was the tiniest little screen. And I was like, oh man, what am I going to do now? And then I had to kind of learn what the words meant because there was no way to program the sounds or to understand what was going on unless you knew what a filter was or an oscillator or a waveform. So I had to do that. But then at a certain point in time, I really needed to support myself and continue my pathway to doing what I wanted to do. And one of the things that was open to me and kind of called me was this idea of being a product specialist. And what happened? Yeah. And the story. So I called up Korg and I said, hey, I want to maybe do something with you guys. And they said, oh, great. Well, come down to our offices. You can audition for the job, bring a Korg synthesizer and try to sell us on it. Try to make it sound, you'll go in front of the vice president and some of us, and we'll see if you can make us convinced that we should have it. I said, well, I don't really have a Korg synthesizer right now. I have a Roland synthesizer. So they said, okay, we'll bring that. So I brought my Roland D50 at the time, which I really, really loved. And I had a good audition. I convinced them that the D50 was a great, great machine. And they gave me the job with Korg, which was a very important job because of a few reasons. One of which is that I got to fill in a lot of the blanks. I could ask a lot of questions. So some of the things that I didn't know about synthesizers, my friends there would kind of tell me. They would explain to me, a little bit more about the technical details about oscillators and ring modulation and FM synthesis and all these things that were kind of filling in the blanks. Because here I am, mostly coming from the point of view of being this musician who just was passionate about sound. And I would do anything. I would figure out anything, even if it was hard, just to make a cool sound. So here I am in those days doing that and getting a job where my job was to explain the synthesis of these keyboards to other people, like in a store or in a clinic setting. So I got really good at explaining to other people how these things work and taking a technical concept and turning it into plain English, which was an interesting thing to learn. And I would use that job as a vehicle for my own musical career and always prepare a cool piece of music that I could play at a NAMM show so I could, kind of further and let people know, hey, I'm a player, I'm a composer, this is what I do, and also function as a product specialist. So
you also learn a little bit how those products are built, because this is more
yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, things would come out, like the Korg Wave Station would come out, and I would learn all about it. What is going on? What is that? So I would learn about wave sequencing, and it was a real education for me. And the other part of it was that it was an education in how to work with people on the manufacturing side, and how to present products, and how to talk to the engineers, but also how to express to the public what's going on, and filling in the gaps again of what I learned. So that experience of working for a manufacturer, and then after Korg I worked for Kurzweil and even got a little closer to the engineers and was able to get more information and kind of become comfortable in almost like an in-between space where I could discuss things with engineers but also be a musician. And then of course after Korg and Kurzweil, my career started to move a little faster in the music space, and I got a bunch of, like, I played with the Dixie Dregs and, Liquid Tension and David Bowie and, of course, Dream Theater for the last 28 years. So in that, so as a development of that space, one of the things I've always been interested in is alternative controllers. I was always fascinated with anything somebody could come up with to kind of push the boundaries. Like, what can we do with our hands, with our being human beings, to create something more expressive or interesting? So, my interest in that pathway led me to Stanford University. I was playing an instrument at the time called the eigenharp, which was a fascinating, looked like a bassoon, but it was a high-tech kind of controller instrument, eigen, E-I-G-E-N. And it was pretty cool. So I was invited to Stanford University, and I met the people there, like Dr. Julius Smith, who's, an amazing professor. He probably taught most of the people who are heads of all the different companies and, the audio division, Google, Facebook, you name it. He's had his hands, he's taught like those people. Anyway, so I met him, and I met some of his partners because he was working with some guys with some interesting music tech products. And so I was invited to be an artist in residence there for a little while. But as part of that, when I got together with some of Julius's team, they were interested in what I thought could be a cool product. So I had experience in the early days of the iOS music technology and all the apps that people were building. And I was fascinated by the whole idea of a touch screen and what you could do. When I first put my hand on a little touch screen, I really had a strong kind of sense that there was some really cool individual finger control that could happen on a touch screen like that. So, backing up a little bit, I first got in touch with a guy who was working on some, interesting technology on iOS. And I talked to him about my idea, which later became MorphWiz, which was this concept of having all these vertical lines, and every line could represent a note, and every movement on any line would be completely independent finger control. It was before MPE or anything like that. It was like nobody knew or thought of it, anything like that really. So I could change the filter of one note without changing the other one, or I could bend this pitch and not this pitch, and everything could be totally independent. A very new concept, and then that was MorphWiz, which came out many, many years ago. So all those things kind of led. Now I'm at Stanford University, and they're asking me what I might like to do together. By that time, I developed some other concepts about how I wanted to make a musical instrument on a small, like, touch screen. And I was thinking about the smaller screens, like iPhones and stuff like that, not necessarily even iPads. So in our discussion, I said, well, you know what? I have this experience with, like, this idea of touch on a screen like that. And I expressed to them these ideas. And Julius, of course, was the one of the main inventors of physical modeling. So we ended up combining my ideas for playing on a touch screen with his physical model, and we worked on that product called GeoShred. And it was a really great marriage of that kind of like level of control and the sound. And one of the main things about it was this whole idea that I've been developing for years of the way that you can seamlessly go between a fretless kind of modality and a diatonic modality, where you could put your hand on a note, and when the finger hits the note, it would be absolutely in tune. And as soon as you move, it would start to have some kind of vibrato. And then when you move your finger from left to right and you're changing pitch, you could start in tune, and then when you move your finger to a point in time and your finger stops, it would almost like a magnet. it would go in tune again until you moved your finger. So we came up with this kind of musical, magical way to play in a fretless kind of a way, but it was like amazing. And every finger could do it independently. So that was really one of the things behind GeoShred that has made it, kind of what it is.
Gotcha. So I mean, obviously, what I add the links to the GeoShred and Wizdom music, to the in the in the description of, so whoever would like to learn a little bit more, watch the video how you play with it, so it will be added. But I just wonder, do you use either your tools or any? I mean, I know that you also train models. I remember also when you were talking to Rick, you called this like a teenager. So are you using all this like a tech when you are composing, or this is just like more, for fun, or just for like as products for people, or you still, when you compose, you're just more, in the classical sort of mode and with, piano or maybe your cork.
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, the last solo albums I've made, I'm in the studio and I'm using, in my case, I'll use Logic to do what I do, and I take advantage of Logic's capabilities, to do it. I haven't used any AI stuff in Logic yet, although they're starting to come out with that. I've certainly, been experimenting over the last couple of years with a lot of AI. I think you probably know that I'm a visiting artist at MIT. I was last year, and I'm doing that again this year. And we're working on a very interesting interactive music AI system. So it's very different than the Sunos and Udios and those companies that are doing great stuff. But in this case, I wanted to create something that was more like a jamming partner for myself, meaning that I can sit down and play, and the AI model would listen to what I'm playing and respond and play along with me. And that's what we've been working on and getting some really good results. And that project is now continuing in its second year with exploration and research and seeing, where it goes. And there's a ton of implications for where it could go as a product, although I'm working with PhD researchers at MIT, and that's not necessarily our focus right now. It's more about seeing what's possible. Now, bring it forward to your question, which is, do I use some of the stuff in my compositional work when I'm writing for Dream Theater or writing for my own albums? And the reality is that, well, I'll talk about purely about myself right now, which is that, I've done so much exploring with these systems now that right now I've been kind of on tour with Dream Theater over the last year and a half, coming on 2 years. And when that all ends up and I get back into my studio, I honestly don't know exactly how I'm going to proceed because so many things have changed. It's, I don't have to tell you, but maybe some of the listeners would want to understand that it's truly mind-blowing what can happen right now with the tech. It goes beyond what most people think is possible to the point where you really kind of have to rethink. One would really want to rethink, what am I doing? How is the music I'm making relate to what's going on in the world today? How am I creating it? What am I going to do? So it's a personal journey for me to take all that I've learned and been involved with tech and figure out how to channel it into my own compositions, or let's say my next solo album. Whether I use AI or not, I don't even know, because I'm not there. I'm not at that point yet. I'm still been working with the school, been working with been on the road and going, oh my God, this is so great. This is insane. I will say something about Dream Theater, because many people know me within Dream Theater. In Dream Theater, as progressive as we are as a group, it's not being, how do I say this? It's not really about where my head is at with technology and my exploration and my pathway forward. It's more about me as a musician, as a composer, and I'm interacting with people who are not coming from the same place that I am. And it's more almost like, let's say, a traditional place. And there's a different kind of feeling about AI and what that means to the creative process. And luckily for me, I'm able to say, you know what, that's great, guys. I don't even need to turn on my computer when I'm with you. I'll sit in my keyboard and we'll compose music and make some great stuff, which is totally cool. That's kind of my dream theater headspace.
Mm-hmm.
And I allow them as a group to blossom in whatever way they want as the years go by, and figure out if there's any technology that the group wants to use. So it's more about my own personal life as a technologist and a composer and musician, how the technology really gets brought into my life and then gets moved forward. The part of Dream Theater that takes advantage of who I am as a technologist, it's more about my bringing like a cool instrument into the fold. Like I can bring in GeoShred, or I can bring in a rolling seaboard and do something cool, or I can bring in my Osmos keyboard, the Expressive E keyboard.
Oh yeah, I love it. I mean,
which is incredible. Yeah. So, and I'm very like involved with the Osmos and the seaboard and all these things. So they take, they'll respect and be interested in my maybe bringing in a new kind of sound into the group. So that.
Gotcha. I actually wanted to, jokingly ask you about your model, because last time you spoke to Rick nine months ago, you called him like a teenager, the model. So I was asking, to ask if it actually come of age. Is he already like a adult, or is still like a
Great question. So, not all that much has changed since I was with Rick, because I'm just starting my second, just literally went up there for 1 week and we got started with the next part of the journey. So by next September, we'll be able to hopefully we'll have more of a start to be an adult. Right now, I've just been doing more training. The way that the MIT project works right now is we have models that are focused on different elements of musicality. Like one model is especially good at playing leads against chords, whereas another model might be good at the opposite and playing chords against an incoming melody. So for each musical kind of like style, there's like a separate model. Like there's one that I helped to train, which is kind of really, really good at playing like a Jordan meets Bach style. I think I played a little bit on Rick's broadcast. It's awesome because it could play all by itself, but the more interesting thing is it will listen to me play for, let's say, 2-4 measures, whatever, and then based on what I played, it will make decisions and play its 4 measures, and we can go back and forth. I'm listening to the model is listening to me, and we have this whole very interesting interaction. And one very cool thing about the models that we're training, and I don't think most people even understand this, so I'll point it out, is that the models are primarily weighted or trained with my data, MIDI data that I gave to my PhD researcher, a guy named Lancelot Blanchard. And so they're really looking at my training data to make this happen. But when the model actually plays, it's almost like it can really surprise me because it's not just playing back exactly what I played. It learned from me, and then maybe it puts it together in a way that I'll find surprising, much like a student. Like, if I sat with a student for a year and I taught him everything I know, he would come back and the student would then do things that I'd be like, oh, that's cool. That's interesting. They'd have their own way to kind of put things together. And that's what I find like really interesting about the work we're doing is these models have been trained, but then they come back and they show me something that is like new that I wouldn't have thought of, but it's based on the information that I put in there.
Gotcha. So you see, like when I watched like you playing and actually explaining this on Rick's broadcast, first thing that came to my mind is can be like amazing educational tool, right? So it can actually transform like education in musical education in the future, isn't it? So like it provides some new cool ways actually funny ways, fun ways, to do musical education, right? I mean, even for experienced musicians.
Oh, absolutely. everybody I talk to about this in the manufacturing world, literally everyone I tell about this wants to see it, wants to know what's going on.
Mhm.
Making appointments when we can. And I'm sure like last year at NAM, I had different companies come up and take a look, and they're all like, whoa, we want to keep our eyes on that. Because again, like we are not making a product, but all the different models that we're creating have tremendous implications towards a future product. Ear
Gotcha.
training, musical knowledge, performance. There's many ways. Like if you would sit in the room and I'd show you all these things, you would be going, oh my God, this could be a fill in the blank. So
Gotcha.
that's one of the
Interesting.
interesting things. Yeah, yeah.
Jordan, I mean, I think you are the best person to ask this question, because usually tech people sort of like discuss this between themselves, but they talk about the musicians, but without musicians, in the sort of in the conversation.
You
And
bet.
I mean, this like kind of cliche question, like ethical, dilemmas of AI. So, I mean, no, I can see you are just so excited. I mean, there are some excited opportunities, but are you? I mean, not much personally feel threatened, but I mean, just for the music or culture itself, feel sometimes that, it can harm culture in general, not maybe music, but in general, what I mean, in
Yeah.
wider sense, like I don't know, sensitivity and, some kind of musicality, like a different, like even books, writing. What's your, what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, we're at a very tricky time. There's a lot of pushback. I noticed that all the people that are trying to do like demonstrations about things like Suno or Udio online, or when you read the comments, people are like, you don't need that, like that's destroying the world, or hire a real musician, or all these things. And so I'm always like, oh my God,
So that's why I wanted to ask the real musician, right?
yeah, yeah. And I'm always like, wow, that is not an attractive space to put yourself. Like I don't feel a great urge to show people like the amazing things that I'm doing, like that I can do at home with AI, because all that's going to happen is people are going to say, oh, you should just be hiring somebody. You don't need that. Why are you doing that? All this stuff. And I feel like I really understand the hesitancy to fully accept something like AI, because first of all, if you read the headlines in the newspaper, aside from music, a lot of the headlines makes one feel very scared about where it's going. Like it's serious. Like where is all this going? And the fact that it's moving so fast, it seems like it's in many ways it's dangerous. So there's so many questions on the highest kind of like level about AI, and those things are not necessarily like my department in terms of I'm focused on music and creativity and trying to do cool things that enhance, my own spirit of creation and
Mhm.
just being an inspired person. But at the same time, I get it. I totally get it. Like, wow, what a tricky time. People see an AI clip, and the first thought is like, well, that's, they're building these huge data centers that are going to like destroy the world. And
Yeah,
so,
but that's maybe not really related to AI itself, but really like how it's used, like any other tool, right? So you can make it for good, like to inspire, and on the other hand, it can be used by someone else to do something, like harmful, creating some kind of
right,
fake
right.
stuff,
But
and
for,
it's.
but yeah, but for some people, any usage of AI, they get upset about because of environmental concerns, and they don't
Mhm.
really even. Most of these people don't even realize what percentage of an environmental concern something is. Like if I post a 30-second clip that's a visual AI thing, people get all upset because they're upset about
Mhm.
the environment, and thinking that this is some horrible thing. And again, I'm not disqualifying anybody's thought or thinking because I'm not an expert in how much,
Mhm.
in the environmental situation with AI. But I guess one of the things I want to say for anybody who's like watching this is, yes, I am sensitive to this situation with technology and AI on many levels. So I'm not just like blatantly putting it out there and not keeping my eye open on the legal concerns and musicians' concerns and all that. But at the same time, I am working on trying to steer it a little bit to having the tools be something that are truly inspiring and educational and creative. Another side of this is that, one of the big concerns about what's going on with AI is so good at creating music right now, even for people who are not musicians. Like, my cousin who is tone deaf can, put in a prompt and they can get a song and it sounds really, really good. Well, there's a couple sides of that. One is all of a sudden people are flooded with music. They're just like overwhelmed, even like on Spotify or Apple Music or the different systems. Thousands and thousands of songs are coming into it, and they're pretty much, a lot of them are by people who are not musicians. And what does that do for those of us who are musicians? So like flooding the market with content is not really a good thing. But that is a bad thing, and you don't know what's real and what's not.
It's also hard to harder. It's I understand it's like with photography. Digital photography was so cool, but on the other hand, it just made the life of photographers so much harder, right? If you're a professional photographer, right?
It makes it harder. Yeah, because all of a sudden there's so many images. There's everybody and their brother is making digital images, and they can be really good. So there is a negative to that. There's no doubt about it. But let's talk about the positive side of it too, just to understand, at least from my perspective, what this is. I've always been of the mindset that if you give anybody the power or the gift of being able to make music, it's a beautiful thing. If I create GeoShred and one of the patches in GeoShred just lets you slide your finger along it, and it's a blues scale that can play against the backing track that's in the same key, well, you don't need to go to Juilliard for 10 years to be able to make some nice music. And all of a sudden, if I put it in front of somebody who's a non-musician, how cool is that? That's like a wonderful thing. You're giving somebody the ability to make music. So to me, that's a fantastic gift. If somebody goes into Suno and they type in a prompt and they send their sister a birthday song, right? Maybe they collected some, or they thought of some nice things about their sister. I do this
sometimes to my parents. Yeah. They send it, songs to my parents.
You put in some ideas about who they are in the lyric generator, or use ChatGPT or whatever. You get a song about them, you put it in Suno, you say you want it to be a Broadway style, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you send it to them and it makes a big smile. Well, that was never possible before. Is that a bad thing? Well, I think it's a really positive thing, because somebody was able to generate this. It made them happy. They made music. The person who received it has never gotten a song about themselves for their birthday. Like it's kind of amazing. They're like, how did this happen? So,
and I know that for some people, it's sometimes even it's just a spark that can, like create desire, like a generate desire to to become to a musician, right? Or like I heard stories about people who just did something and they say, oh gee, it's so cool. They have for the first time experienced some certain creativity and creative output that they.
Yeah. So I think it's important to realize that there's many sides to this picture. Understanding, yes, musicians are threatened by this, because all of a sudden the tech can make music by itself. So it's like, wow, what does that mean? And the other hard part and thing that people are figuring out is, what about the legalities of it? Like how, like all the music that I wrote, all of a sudden through the years, all of a sudden it's being trained by these companies, and what do I get? What do any of the composers receive?
What do you feel about it? I mean, sorry to pick you on this one, but once again, it's probably the biggest controversy, right? And I mean, some people say, hey, on the other hand, even if you're a musician, you're still inspired by something, right? So it's just AI works really like some, like an imitation of a human brain that inspires. So do you feel this as as a thief, steal, or really some kind of inspiration? What is your sort of perspective of, training, especially these large companies?
Well, you make a really great point in that everybody, all musicians, nobody's living in a closet. we all heard music. We're all grabbing this idea. We learned harmony. We got some chordal ideas from this guy. We got some rhythmic ideas from this group. We put it together. We combine it. We do it. And in a big way, that's very much what the AI training is about. We're not sampling the data. We're not actually making a recording of it. The AI is being trained. The AI models are learning about the possibilities, much like a human being. And that's something that most people don't understand either. But let's back up a little bit and just say, like, the guy, the musician who is in LA right now, and he's just a composer or whatever, and he's learning that these companies fed his music or all his music into the machine, and there was no like legal system for doing it. That's distressing. It's kind of like, wow, my music was used in whatever amount or whatever way to help train this machine. It doesn't feel very fair. So I think that's why now all the companies are making deals with the majors, Suno and Udio, and this new company, I think it's called Clay out in California. Mm-hmm. They're all making deals with the majors because the major labels, they all want a piece of it too, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody wants a piece of this action. But the problem is, what will really happen to the musician? Yeah, the labels will end up making money, and what will the musician really make? At some point, somebody's going to come along to me and say, Jordan, do you want to opt in? Do you want to say, okay, that people can use your music? What will I get paid, or what will anybody really get paid? Like 0.00001 cents, like you make $10 a year or something like that on it. There's a lot of issues, but you know what? But I think the important thing for me to focus, I guess it's important for me to let people know, because I am very deeply involved in all this stuff, that I'm also aware that there's some real issues. But I do like to stay in the creative side of things and think about the inspiration that is possible and the amazing new possibilities of musical expression that can happen out of all this. Because I think it's the most powerful technology we've ever had in the music space, which means it opens up more creative possibilities than anything else ever. So that is really important.
Yep. Jordan, I know we have to slowly, go to an end, but I mean, I need to ask you this question, because I mean, I read on your website, actually, there's a question, what would you like to do in 20 years from now? And you mentioned a holographic keyboard controller, right? So I always ask the question, to my guests, what will be some kind of future innovations? And you mentioned a manipulation with, neuron density, cerebral spatial control, so it's just can you just elaborate a little bit, on this thought? It's just crazy futuristic.
Well, it's one of the great questions, right? Internal, personal questions for myself, as well as something everybody wants to kind of know, where is it all going? One of the areas of research that I think is really interesting is kind of like a brain to music connection. Now if I think of something and I sit at a keyboard, my brain messages go to my fingers and out it comes because it plays the piano. But I've really been thinking more and more about this idea of my brain is always thinking about riffs and passages and music, and what about just really refining that technology where you can pick up the brain signals and it can actually turn into music.
Gotcha.
That would be incredible. But that said, I'm also always interested in what can we do with our touch, with who we are, everything that we are, the sense of the haptic touch, the visual sense. I think all of that feels really important. And I think the best instruments are the ones that put all that together.
Cool. Thank you for saying. I mean, I'm extremely obsessed with a human computer interface. So I mean, when I loved when I just watched and some of your interviews, and I read that you're just of course, as a keyboardist, you're mostly right. I mean, all this like a Rolly and Seaboard, but like even this kind of ideas. And I always used to make jokes when I was like a teenager at school. I used to like experiment with a little bit, with the like psychotropic substances. So I always say somebody who took LSD always know what it means, to feel about music, in a sort of like a brain to music or brain to, like a painting, because you're automatically, your senses sort of kind of, how to say, mix or mingle, and you start to sort of like some people say they actually even feel colors, right? Or
right,
stuff
right.
like this, so all of like that's kind of like how can we create instruments that they can do that. Interesting.
Totally. Very interesting.
Jordan, would you like for the very end say something about, I know that you are also ambassador for a couple of startups right now, right? The Moises.ai and Lava Music. So would you like say a couple of words about those startups? How
Sure.
Why did you like get
I've been working with Moises for a long time now, and first of all, it's some of the coolest, nicest tech people that I've ever been associated with, and they started out their path working on the track separation, because they probably do it better than anybody else, at least in my knowledge. So I was really interested in this amazing magic. And when I first started to work for them, I didn't totally realize it was AI. And then later on found out, of course, that what allows them the ability to do that track separation, it's all based on AI. Maybe I shouldn't tell some of the musicians out there that are using it, because so many millions of musicians use that, and we don't want to upset anybody. But that technology, being able to separate tracks like that, is based on AI learning. And it just keeps on getting better and better. Moises, like every couple of months or whatever, or every month, they're coming out with improvements on all this new instruments they can recognize. They come out with the ability to really look at the harmonic structure and be able to represent that visually. So, that part of it's really incredible. And of course, because they are a forward-thinking team, they're also thinking about AI in different ways. Their latest technology allows you to have AI stem generation based on tracks that you have or you wrote. So like if I write something in the piano, let's say 8 or 16 bars, I can then go in and actually ask Moises to generate something that would go with my piano track. So their thinking is not, the important part of what Moises is kind of putting forward is that they don't want to necessarily endorse music that's just a prompt and it just kind of comes out of nowhere. They're more interested in, okay, you created something, and now we want to help that creative process and work with the artist to be able to maybe, generate something based on what they've, put out there as a starting point. A little bit different thinking, right, than some of the other companies, and not saying bad, or you're not making a judgment call, but Moises is about supporting the musician, in the track separation, giving them a great learning tool that they can use, and also, giving them tools that they can use in the studio that will support them, and not replace them. That's
sure.
That's
And how about Lava Music? I know. It's some cool, really like a cool hardware.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. Lava. So I'm very good friends and very supportive of Lava Music because, first of all, they've been working on the smart guitars for a while. Some really cool instruments. I love the idea of a smart guitar. It's really an awesome concept with built-in effects and stuff like that. And, I always thought that guitars could go in that route. So I've been working with them and helping them along the way. Their latest product is the Lava Studio, which is an amplifier, which has a lot of cool possibilities because it's an amp, pretty small, has a screen that unfolds, and it has all the built-in effects you could want. It even has a whole educational system where, it connects with your internet, and you can go on and get interactive kind of lessons right on the system itself, and it offers backing tracks and drum parts, and there's a mini DAW inside of it. Just a forward-thinking, guitar-based company. And as part of my own guitar journey, playing guitar, I just thought that, wow, this is the kind of company that I want to, support. So because they're doing really creative, innovative.
Like add links to both companies in the description. So can you see like any other like super interesting startups lately that you would like to give shout out, to, like when, like something that sort of spark your interest, like maybe some shows or someplace.
Well, again, I'm very involved with the Expressive E people, the Osmos keyboard. Probably worth mentioning, because I feel like the Osmos is probably, in my mind, one of the most serious advancements of the keyboard that has come out in many, many years. And there's been some other really great things, certainly. We can talk about this. But the Osmos stands out to me because it's based on a black and white keyboard structure. Literally, you're playing it like a real keyboard. It looks like a real keyboard. But then they figured out a way to extend the gestures, to take what you can do with your hands on a black and white keyboard and to make it so that there's so many more possibilities. I mean, the way that it works is so interesting, because they figured out mechanically how to allow these gestures to really feel like they make sense. Like it's not just a gesture that you go, it feels a little awkward or anything like that. When you press down on a key and you do a crescendo from the top of the key to the bottom, you go, wow, that's really cool. When you press into it and get the actual aftertouch, you go, oh my God, there's like a real physical space there. And it feels really like, it feels right. Especially when you marry these things with the sound, or even the keys go back and forth. They wiggle left and right, and you can do vibrato that way. And it's not like something that is feels out of control. It feels like, oh, wow, that physical gesture makes sense under my hand. So the brilliant engineers there figured out all these physical things you can do on that keyboard, new mechanical things that have a great feel, and they married it with the Hawken sound engine, which what's it called, the Egan Matrix, which is Ed Egan, and it's the same system basically that's inside the Continuum these days, right? But they married it with that, and the whole package of what's happening physically and sonically really fits together so beautifully, which is 100%.
100%. I met them in Superbooth in Berlin, these German shows. I mean, and I just fell in love. I mean, just like I was like blown away. I mean, such a cool controller. I mean,
it's really cool.
I would just like, yeah. Jordan, listen, I mean, I know we have to like finish, slowly. So I mean, like to thank you, for dedicating a little bit of time to share your thoughts. I know we were going on tour, right? Yet in February, right? Asian tour?
I'm leaving soon on the 25th in about 5 days.
All right. Okay, so, so have fun. Thank you so much, and...
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you liked it. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and of course on our YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to it and hit the bell, because we publish a lot of interesting videos there, not just the episodes. You can also become a supporter and get premium content like additional reading, unpublished videos on our Buy Me a Coffee page, linked in the description of this episode. See you in the next one. Yo.